Congressman John Lewis or Senator Elizabeth Warren or many others you want to fill in the blanks with, including women who have cause to bring accusations against powerful men, Dalits, Kafirs, and so forth in the world on the sidelines. These are those who are ruining the game as played in different national fields and spaces. And Trump's fretful rally cry then is nothing short of a confession of that fear that the historically silent in this regard, whatever their station, may once again be arrogating to themselves roles as interpreters in and of the world. So many examples we could point to about how this worked. Much work has been done in terms of defining Western civilization as, in fact, the working of what's called the translatio imperii et studii. And you'll recognize this as ideological work, translation work. Our English translation doesn't really do this justice, but it is a kind of exchange based on a kind of language game that sums up the agenda, the modus operandi, the founding legend of Western civilization as a complex of marauding peoples, you know, the social, cultural, political Trojans who compel others, right, through kind of cultural colonization to think on their terms through their language and categories, right? That's scriptural work. It has been thought about in terms of the racial contract, which is a translation of the sexual contract theory associated with Carol Portman, the work advanced by Judith Butler and others. This is what, of course, I'm thinking about in terms of scripturalization. Black philosopher Charles Mills drew upon Habermas's notion of the ideal speech situation that registered a kind of circle of conversation among relative equals being in fact being exploded on the terms that are registered here by Trump and allies. So the independent interpreter faces a certain kind of pathology and insanity that would deny this relative equality of exchange. Here you find the distortion of interpretation and language itself. This was again the focus of Baldwin with this focus on pathology. So wonderful statement made in Baldwin's The Fire Next Time when he has the outsider, the outlier in this ideal speech situation actually speak to the truth about what cannot be named. Quote, "Even if I could speak, no one would believe me, and they would not believe me precisely because they would know that what I said was true." Here one could easily see how this registers in the case of Trump's invective against the footballers. His eruption does register in a sick, again as in Baldwin's pathology, sick sense. How could the footballers be allowed to speak, to be articulate, to project their views? Too much is at stake. Mills, again drawing on Habermas's notion of ideal speech situation, aptly summarized this as sober dialogue among relative equals, but he goes on to say that the situation in fact requires our absence, if you mean, here he means that complex of outliers or misinterpreters. The situation, he argues, requires our absence. Think here of the black footballers. Since we are literally the men and women who know too much, who know where the bodies are buried. After all, so many, he argues, are our own. As represented by the footballers and the likes of King James, such people are not totally absent or silent. They continue in all sorts of ways to project their images, visions, and ideas. Now, I want to close by leaving you with an image here. I'm running quickly out of time. A set of images which could serve as an example of the kind of counter movement or counter ideology to the violence that is scripturalization, or whatever concept one might use in this case. There are examples recently unveiled at the, let me see if I put it here. You call these? The National Portrait Gallery. Could go on and on about this, but I'll quickly come to an end here. Part of now of the Smithsonian Institution, and as such, part of the canonical structure. The examples, these are the official portraits of Barack and Michelle Obama. These two national, if not now world symbols, interpreted by black artists known to be sensitive to politics of race. So not a lot of time to dig in here, but I want to mention a few things. Striking that black faces are inserted into the canon. That's what a museum represents. Another representation of the scriptural. I agree it's important to ask politically conscious readers, interpreters, what they see here, whether this is the effort to remedy an obvious historical exclusion or to destabilize the canonical tradition. Note Barack Obama's face, note that intensity of gaze with the absence of the smile. I would contrast sharply with the tradition of presidents' faces and their general bearing, reflecting the expected, now I'm quoting here, so it's not my caustic reading, from the New York Times, reflecting the expected bland propriety, expressionless and composed faces, the general uninflected dignity. President Obama's difference here suggests not so much the feigned self or national satisfaction and accomplishment that the stances and environment projected by the portraits, but instead something approaching impatience for something. He's full-bodied and seated. He's not just a head. He's not on or near a horse. Not framed as though transcendent, but leaning, quote, tensely forward, frowning, elbows on knees, arms crossed, as if listening. No smiles, no Mr. Nice Guy. He's still troubleshooting, still in the game. His engaged and assertive demeanor does not project detachment so much, but in my view here, the professorial statesman leading a seminar like our own about problems of the nation, of the world, listening, probing, arguing, taking matters seriously as he's embedded in flowers from Kenya, Hawaii, Chicago. These betray the basis or perspective from which he listens and opines, and the springboard that makes him authentic man of the world. Michelle Obama, what is at first so striking is that her body is not part of the long, ugly, racialized tradition of overexposed, fetishized black female bodies. Right? That we don't see just a body. Although she does not, I wonder, can any female public figure escape being a, quote, couturial spectacle? I agree that she here projects rock-solid cool, another critic says. The chalk-grained face draws attention away from the usual color fetish, color anxiety. She seems comfortable, utterly self-possessed, natural. These are just examples of interpreters doing their work, in fact, interpreting the nation, interpreting the human in relation to and over against nation, and so on it must go. This final statement from the late Lyndon Barrett, who's quoting partly Joel Williamson in his book, Rage Against Order. Race is a problem of the mind and not the body. It assumes white folk have the power to make scapegoats of the other, to manage them sufficiently to create the illusion that they want to see. The uses to which white power put black people in this fashion are virtually limitless once the game started. The Negro, he says, could be made the scapegoat of any number of ills, either body or the mind. Well, these are simply examples at hand for me. You will have your own course to think with about human social practices, politics, pathologies, in terms of the dynamics of ongoing modern ills, right? We have made the decision to probe, to excavate these dynamics through the lenses of playing with the concept, scripturalizing, scripturalization. Each of you may begin elsewhere or use other examples as windows onto this field of analysis, but let us agree that our charge must be to stay focused on explaining the game that's being played on the field. Who's on first, who's dribbling, who hits whom hard, the state of play and of bodies, including damaged ones, the haunting, the buried ones, the twisted minds, the sunken place, these at any given time, that these all should be examined in terms of the mechanisms, the orders that we may aptly and compellingly refer to as scripturalizing and scripturalization. The real game has always been and is now nothing if not about the scriptural and its authorized interpreters or proclaimed or positioned misinterpreters and interpreters, and the value or non-value projected onto or denied such figures. We're all implicated in this game. There's no getting out of it. The worst sin is to proceed with the play as though it were natural and pacific. Here lies a compelling reason for our gathering, for our efforts, our conversation, our play. Thank you very much.